The year is 1757. A young woman, Maria Theresa, Empress of the sprawling Habsburg domains, faces a storm unlike any before. Her family? The Habsburgs, rulers of a vast empire that stretched across Europe for centuries, had built their power not just on royal weddings and clever diplomacy, but on something far more brutal and breathtaking. Military might. Their story is packed with moments when everything hung in the balance, when a single charge, a clever defense, or an impossible victory changed the course of history for generations. Forget dusty textbooks. These are the untold stories. The heart-pounding moments when the Habsburgs stared down impossible odds and came out on top, forever changing the map of Europe. Number 7. Siege of Vienna, 1529. The air in Vienna was thick with fear, a palpable dread that clung to the stone walls like the early morning mist. It was September 1529, and the Ottoman Empire under the fearsome Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent was at the city's gates. This was not just any army. This was a force of perhaps 100,000 to 200,000 men, a vast sea of warriors and artillery that had swept across the Balkans, leaving a trail of conquered lands in its wake. For centuries, the Ottoman Empire had been expanding, a relentless tide pushing ever westward. Vienna, the capital of the Habsburg Archduchy of Austria, stood as the last major barrier before the heart of Central Europe. Inside the city, the situation was desperate. Vienna's defenders numbered perhaps 20,000, a mix of regular soldiers, citizen militias, and even students. Their leader was Count Nicholas Somme, a veteran commander in his 70s. His face etched with years of battle, Somme knew the stake. If Vienna fell, the road to Prague, to Munich, to the very core of the Holy Roman Empire would be open. This was not just a siege. It was a clash of civilizations, a fight for survival. The weeks leading up to the siege had been a blur of frantic activity. Messengers had galloped across the countryside calling for reinforcements, but few arrived. The Habsburg Emperor Ferdinand I was stretched thin, his resources depleted by other conflicts. He could offer little direct help. Vienna was on its own. The citizens, however, were determined. They tore down buildings outside the walls that could offer cover to the attackers. They filled in ditches and reinforced crumbling sections of the ancient fortifications. Every man, woman, and child who could wield a shovel or carry a stone played a part. Suleiman's arrival was a terrifying spectacle. The ground trembled under the hooves of thousands of horses. The sky darkened with dust, and the ear was assaulted by the relentless rhythm of Ottoman drums and the cries of their soldiers. The Ottomans, confident from their easy victories across Hungary, believed Vienna would be another swift conquest. They brought an immense siege train, powerful cannons designed to pulverize stone walls. The siege began with a relentless bombardment. Cannonballs, some weighing hundreds of pounds, slammed into the city walls day after day, chipping away at the ancient stones. Houses inside Vienna shuddered, windows shattered, and the constant roar was a torment. But the Viennese held firm. Somme, despite his age, was everywhere, inspecting defenses, encouraging his men, making sure every breach was quickly repaired. He ordered counter-mining operations, digging tunnels under the walls, to collapse the Ottomans' own efforts to tunnel beneath the fortifications and plant explosives. It was a terrifying, claustrophobic war, fought in the darkness beneath the earth where men could hear the picks and shovels of their enemies. Just feet away, the defenders faced constant assaults. Ottoman janissaries, the Sultan's elite infantry, launched wave after wave of attacks, scaling ladders, trying to find a weak point. The fighting was hand-to-hand, brutal and bloody. Boiling water, rocks, and musket fire rained down from the battlements. One particular attack targeted the Kartnertor Gate, a vulnerable section of the wall. Ottoman miners managed to detonate a massive charge, blowing a huge breach in the fortifications. For a terrifying moment, it seemed all was lost. But the Viennese defenders, rallied by their officers, rushed to the gap, engaging the Janissaries in a desperate melee. They pushed them back, buying time to erect makeshift barricades and reinforce the position. Disease began to spread in the crowded city, and food supplies dwindled. The weather also turned against the invaders. Late September brought heavy rains, turning the unpaved roads around Vienna into a quagmire. The Ottoman horses struggled, and their supplies became difficult to move. The cold, wet weather also affected the Ottoman soldiers, many of whom were used to warmer climates. Sickness began to spread through their vast camp. Their powerful cannons, crucial for breaching the walls, started to sink into the mud, making them difficult to reposition and fire effectively. As October approached, Suleiman faced a difficult decision. His army was suffering, winter was approaching, and Vienna, against all expectations, still stood. He had expected a quick victory, not a stubborn weeks-long struggle that drained his resources and morale. His advisors urged retreat. On October 14th, after a final, desperate assault that was repelled with heavy losses, the Ottoman army began to withdraw. The roar of their cannons, which had been a constant companion for weeks, slowly faded, replaced by an eerie silence. The relief inside Vienna was immense, a collective exhale of breath. The city was battered, its walls scarred, its people exhausted, but it had survived. Count Sohm, wounded by a falling stone, watched the last of the Ottoman banners disappear over the horizon. The cost had been immense in lives and suffering, but the victory was profound. Vienna, and by extension the Habsburg lands, had held. The tide of Ottoman expansion, though not stopped entirely, had been checked at this crucial crossroads. The city's survival sent a powerful message. The Habsburg domains, though often fragmented and under pressure, were not to be easily broken. Number 6. Battle of White Mountain, 1620. The year is 1620. Bohemia, a key kingdom in the Holy Roman Empire, was a powder keg ready to explode. For years, tensions had simmered between the staunchly Catholic Habsburg rulers. It wasn't just about religion. It was about power, about who controlled the destiny of Bohemia. The Habsburgs saw Bohemia as a vital part of their expanding domains, a source of wealth and influence. The Bohemian estates, made up of powerful nobles, saw themselves as independent guardians of their ancient rights and religious freedoms. The spark that ignited the conflict came in 1618. Habsburg officials were thrown out of a window in Prague Castle, an act known as the Defenestration of Prague. It was a direct challenge to Habsburg authority, a declaration of rebellion. The Bohemian estates, seeking to secure their independence, elected their own king, Frederick V, the young Calvinist Elector Palatine. Frederick, married to Elizabeth Stuart, daughter of King James I of England, was seen as a leader who could unite the Protestant cause. Ferdinand II, the Habsburg emperor, was a devout Catholic, determined to restore Catholic authority throughout his lands. He saw the Bohemian revolt not just as a political challenge, but as a personal affront and a religious crusade. He sought alliances, and the most powerful help came from Maximilian I of Bavaria, who commanded the Catholic League, a formidable army led by the brilliant and ruthless Count Johann Tsercles of Tilly. Tilly was a veteran commander, disciplined and unwavering, known for his methodical approach to warfare. By late 1620, the Imperial and Catholic League army, numbering around 28,000 men, was marching on Prague. The Bohemian army, under the command of Prince Christian of Anhalt, was slightly larger, perhaps 30,000 men, but a patchwork force of professional soldiers, hastily raised militias, and mercenaries. They also suffered from internal divisions and a lack of clear leadership. Frederick V, the Winter King, as he would soon be known, was more interested in courtly life than military strategy. He spent the morning of the battle at a banquet while his fate was decided on a hill just outside Prague. The battlefield, known as White Mountain, Bílá hora in Czech, was a modest plateau just a few miles west of Prague. It offered a seemingly strong defensive position for the Bohemian forces, with a steep slope leading up to their lines. On November 8, 1620, A thick fog covered the ground as the armies prepared for battle. The air was cold, damp, and heavy with unspoken tension. Soldiers on both sides, many of whom had been marching for weeks, shivered their breath, misting in the chill air. Tilly, observing the Bohemian positions, saw their weaknesses. Their line was spread thin, and parts of their army were composed of less experienced troops. More importantly, he sensed a lack of cohesion. He ordered his men forward. The Imperial and Catholic League forces, better trained and more disciplined, began their ascent of the hill. They moved slowly, methodically, their muskets gleaming, their pikes held high. The initial fighting was fierce. Bohemian cavalry charged down the slope, hoping to break the Catholic advance, but they were met with disciplined musket fire and the unyielding pikes of Tilly's infantry. As the Catholic forces pushed higher, the Bohemian lines began to waver. Christian of Anhalt's son, also named Christian, led a brave counterattack, but it was too little, too late. The Imperial forces, especially the Spanish and Walloon regiments, pressed their advantage. The fighting lasted barely an hour. One contemporary account described the rapid collapse. The Bohemian army, being ill-disciplined and disunited, gave way with hardly a struggle and fled in panic. The Catholic League's cavalry, sensing victory, surged forward, turning the retreat into a rout. Thousands of Bohemian soldiers threw down their weapons and fled. Many drowned in the Vltava River as they tried to escape. The casualties were disproportionately on the Bohemian side. Perhaps 5,000 of their men were killed or captured, while the imperial forces suffered only a few hundred losses. Frederick V, hearing the disastrous news, fled Prague that very night, with his family abandoning his newfound kingdom. The defeat was crushing. Prague surrendered to the imperial forces without a fight. The consequences of White Mountain were immediate and devastating for Bohemia. Emperor Ferdinand II, now firmly in control, exacted a brutal vengeance. The leaders of the Bohemian revolt were rounded up. On June 21, 1621, 27 Protestant nobles and burghers were publicly executed in Prague's Old Town Square, their heads displayed on spikes. The Bohemian nobility was decimated. Their lands were confiscated by the crown. A vast redistribution of wealth and power that saw loyal Catholic nobles and generals, many of whom had fought at White Mountain, granted vast estates. The old Bohemian constitution, which had guaranteed certain freedoms, was abolished. German replaced Czech as the official language, and the Catholic faith was rigorously enforced. Protestant churches were closed and Protestant clergy were expelled. Thousands of Protestants fled into exile, preferring to leave their homes rather than convert. For the Habsburgs, White Mountain was a triumph of immense proportions. It secured their hereditary rule over Bohemia, a crown they would hold for centuries. It ended Bohemian autonomy and firmly established Catholic dominance, reversing decades of Protestant influence. The wealth and resources of Bohemia were now firmly at the emperor's disposal, greatly strengthening his position in the ongoing 30 Years' War. The victory sent a clear message across Europe. The Habsburgs, backed by their faith and their formidable armies, were a force to be reckoned with, and their power in Central Europe had just reached a new and undeniable level. Number 5. Battle of St. Gotthard, 1664. The mid-17th century was a period of uneasy peace for the Habsburgs, especially concerning their eastern flank. The Ottoman Empire, though no longer at its peak, remained a formidable power, constantly looking for opportunities to expand into Central Europe. In 1663, a large Ottoman army, under the command of Grand Vizier Fazil Ahmed Köprülü, launched a new offensive into Habsburg Hungary. Their goal was clear: to capture strategic fortresses and push deeper into Habsburg territory, perhaps even threatening Vienna again. Emperor Leopold I, still a young ruler, faced a serious challenge. His own forces, though recovering from the devastation of the 30 Years' War, were not immediately strong enough to repel such a massive invasion on their own. He appealed for help from the other European powers, particularly France, a traditional rival of the Habsburgs. Surprisingly, France, under King Louis XIV, sent a contingent of troops, including elite musketeers, perhaps more to check Ottoman expansion than to genuinely support their Habsburg rivals. This unexpected alliance of Catholic powers, united against a common foe, was a rare sight. The combined imperial French and Rhenish forces, along with contingents from other German states, were placed under the command of Raimondo Montecuccoli, one of the greatest military minds of his era. Montecuccoli was a master of defensive warfare, patient, analytical, and keenly aware of the strengths and weaknesses of both his own troops and the enemy. He understood that engaging the Ottoman army in a pitched battle required careful planning and the right terrain. The Ottoman army, estimated at 100,000 men, was a diverse force of janissaries, sipahis, Ottoman cavalry, and auxiliary troops from their vassal states. They were confident, having advanced deep into Hungary and captured the fortress of New-Hasso. Their objective was now to cross the Raba River, a tributary of the Rab, and push further west. Montecuccoli positioned his smaller but highly disciplined army, perhaps 25,000 to 30,000 strong, on the western bank of the Raba River near the small village of Mogersdorf and the Cistercian monastery of St. Gotthard. The terrain was broken with wooded areas, fields, and ravines, which Montecuccoli hoped would negate the Ottoman numerical superiority, especially their cavalry, which thrived on open ground. He planned to defend the river crossings and force the Ottomans into a disadvantageous fight. On August 1, 1664, the battle began. The Ottomans, eager to cross the Raba, launched their first attacks. Their janissaries, known for their bravery and ferocity, stormed across the river. At various points they were met with stiff resistance. The imperial infantry, well-positioned and well-drilled, held their ground, unleashing disciplined volleys of musket fire. The French contingent, under the command of Jean de Coligny, distinguished themselves with their ferocity and tactical skill. Their disciplined charges and steady fire were particularly effective against the less organized Ottoman assaults. The battle raged for several hours. The Ottomans managed to establish a significant bridgehead on the western bank of the river, pushing back some of Montecuccoli's forward positions. For a time it seemed the weight of their numbers might overwhelm the defenders. The fighting was close quarters, brutal and chaotic. Swords clashed against pikes, musket smoke filled the air, and the ground became slick with blood. Montecuccoli, watching the flow of battle from a strategic vantage point, saw an opportunity. The Ottoman forces that had crossed the river were becoming isolated and disorganized as more of their troops tried to funnel across the narrow crossings. He ordered a concentrated counterattack. The imperial cavalry, led by General Gore-Lüneburg, charged into the exposed Ottoman flanks. At the same time, fresh infantry units, including the resolute French troops, launched a coordinated push into the center of the Ottoman bridgehead. The combined assault was devastating. The Ottomans, caught in a vice, were thrown into confusion. Their lines broke. Many were pushed back into the river, where they drowned in their heavy armor and voluminous clothing. The retreat turned into a rout. The Ottoman commanders, including Coprulu, were shocked by the ferocity and effectiveness of the European counterattack. By the end of the day, the Ottoman army was in full retreat, leaving behind thousands of dead and wounded. Estimates vary, but Ottoman losses were catastrophic, possibly as high as 20,000 to 25,000 men, while the Allied European forces suffered only around 2,000 casualties. The Raba River ran red. The victory at St. Gotthard was a decisive blow to Ottoman ambitions. In Central Europe, Grand Vizier Coprulu, humiliated by the defeat, quickly sought peace. Just 10 days after the battle, the Treaty of Vasvar was signed. Although the treaty recognized some Ottoman gains and was criticized by some for being too lenient, it secured a 20-year truce and confirmed the Habsburgs' control over much of Hungary, Transylvania. For the Habsburgs, the Battle of St. Gotthard was a powerful affirmation of their ability to defend their lands and lead a coalition against a formidable foe. It demonstrated the effectiveness of their modernized army Under Montecuccoli's leadership, the victory bolstered Emperor Leopold I's prestige across Europe and signaled that the Habsburg domains, despite internal challenges, were a bulwark against Ottoman expansion. It bought them valuable time, a period of relative peace on their eastern frontier, allowing them to consolidate their power and prepare for future challenges. The triumph echoed through the courts of Europe, a clear message that the Habsburg eagle still soared high. Number 4. Siege of Vienna, 1683. The summer of 1683 saw an all-too-familiar sight for the people of Vienna. The massive, imposing presence of an Ottoman army at their gates. This time, however, it was even larger, perhaps 150,000 to 200,000 men, a truly colossal force, led by Grand Vizier Kara Mustafa Pasha, the ambitious brother-in-law of Sultan Mehmed IV. Kara Mustafa had boasted he would conquer Vienna, and then ride his horse to St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. The Ottoman Empire's ambition was clear: to finally capture the Habsburg capital and establish a permanent foothold in Central Europe. The city of Vienna itself was prepared, but only just. Emperor Leopold I, understanding the gravity of the threat, had fled with his court to Linz, leaving the defense of Vienna to Count Ernst Rudiger von Starhemberg. Starhemberg was a gruff, determined, and deeply courageous man. He commanded a garrison of about 15,000 soldiers, plus a few thousand armed citizens. He knew the odds were stacked against them. The city's fortifications, though improved since 1529, were still vulnerable to a prolonged heavy siege. The Ottoman approach was swift and brutal. They encircled the city, cutting off all supplies. Their engineers immediately began digging siege trenches, pushing ever closer to the city walls. Massive cannons, some of the largest in the world, began to pound the ancient stone. Day after day, the bombardment was relentless. The defenders, often under direct fire, worked tirelessly to repair breaches, clear rubble, and reinforce weakened sections. Life inside the city became a nightmare. Food supplies quickly dwindled, and the people resorted to eating cats, dogs, and rats. Water sources were contaminated or cut off. Disease began to spread rapidly through the crowded, unsanitary conditions. The constant noise of cannon fire, the fear of assault, and the gnawing hunger wore down the morale of both soldiers and civilians. Starhemberg, though suffering from dysentery and wounds, remained steadfast. He personally toured the walls, encouraging his men, reminding them of the stakes. He threatened to shoot any soldier who showed cowardice or attempted to desert. His iron will was the backbone of the defense. The Ottomans focused their main attack on the Berg Bastion and the Lobel Bastion, two key sections of the city wall. They dug an intricate network of tunnels, attempting to undermine the fortifications and plant massive explosive mines. The Viennese, under the guidance of engineer Georg Grimpler, countered by digging their own tunnels, engaging in a deadly subterranean war. They listened for the sounds of Ottoman picks and shovels, then dug towards them, hoping to intercept and destroy the enemy mines before they could detonate. Often, it was a race against time, a desperate gamble in the dark, suffocating earth. Explosions shook the city regularly, sometimes creating breaches, sometimes burying miners alive. Meanwhile, outside the besieged city, a formidable relief army was slowly gathering. Emperor Leopold had appealed to all of Europe for aid, and the response was heartening. The forces of the Holy Roman Empire, led by Duke Charles V of Lorraine, began to assemble. But the true hero was King Jan Sobieski, III of Poland, who, despite his own kingdom's internal problems, rode south with his legendary winged hussars, a cavalry force famed for its ferocity and impact. This coalition army, though composed of different nations and traditions, recognized the existential threat posed by the Ottoman advance. As the siege dragged on into September, Vienna was at its breaking point. Large sections of the outer walls were rubble, and the Ottomans were preparing for a final, decisive assault. The defenders were exhausted, starving, and their numbers were dwindling. Hope was fading, replaced by grim resignation. Then, on September 11th, the unthinkable happened. From the heights of the Kallenberg and Leopoldsberg hills, overlooking Vienna, a signal fire was lit. It was the relief army. The next morning, September 12th, the Allied forces, perhaps 70,000 strong, descended from the hills. It was a sight of incredible power and beauty, especially the Polish winged hussars, their distinctive feathered wings rustling, their lances poised. Kara Mustafa, overconfident and perhaps complacent, had made a critical error. He had not properly secured his rear flank, convinced that Vienna would fall before any significant relief force could arrive. Now his vast army was caught between the unbreakable walls of Vienna and the thundering charge of the European coalition. Sobieski led the charge of his winged hussars, a devastating blow that shattered the Ottoman lines. The Imperial and German infantry and cavalry also attacked with ferocity. The Ottoman soldiers, caught by surprise and demoralized, began to break and flee. Kara Mustafa, witnessing the rout, was powerless to stop it. He abandoned his magnificent tents, his treasures, and his cannons, escaping with a mere handful of men. The relief of Vienna was complete. The city, saved from the brink of annihilation, erupted in cheers. Starhemberg, carried from his sickbed, met Sobieski, calling him a savior. The Ottoman camp, left behind in their hasty retreat, was a trove of riches: gold, silks, jewels, and even sacks of coffee beans, a novelty that would soon become popular across Europe. The victory at Vienna was more than just a military triumph. It was a turning point. It shattered the myth of Ottoman invincibility in Europe. It marked the beginning of a long decline for the Ottoman Empire, and the start of a period of expansion for the Habsburgs. Emperor Leopold I, once forced to flee, returned to a city reborn. His prestige and that of the Habsburg dynasty soared across Europe. The victory at Vienna solidified the Habsburgs' role as the defenders of Christendom and positioned them as the dominant power in Central Europe, ready to reclaim lost territories and reshape the balance of power for generations to come. Number 3. Battle of Zenta, 1697. The late 17th century was a period of intense rivalry between the Habsburg and Ottoman empires. The victory at Vienna in 1683 had ignited a renewed push by the Habsburgs to reclaim the vast territories of Hungary and Transylvania that had been under Ottoman control for over a century and a half. This long and brutal conflict, known as the Great Turkish War, saw years of hard fighting, sieges, and skirmishes. By 1697, the war was still grinding on. The Ottoman Sultan, Mustafa II, determined to reverse his empire's recent setbacks, personally led a massive army into Hungary, aiming to strike a decisive blow against the Habsburg forces. His army, estimated at around 80,000 to 100,000 men, was a powerful force, eager to restore the glory of the Ottoman Empire. Opposing him was Prince Eugene of Savoy, a young but already brilliant commander in Habsburg service. Eugene was a complex figure, short, unassuming in appearance, but with a keen strategic mind and an incredible personal bravery that inspired his troops. He commanded an imperial army of about 50,000 men, a mix of Austrian, German, and Hungarian soldiers. Eugene understood the importance of intelligence and speed. He constantly sought information on Ottoman movements, and once he had it, he acted decisively. As the Ottoman army marched through Hungary, Eugene shot of them, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The Sultan's plan was to cross the Tisa River at the town of Zenta, today Senta in Serbia, then march on to the fortress of Szeged, or perhaps even deeper into Habsburg territory. Eugene knew he had to prevent this crossing. On September 11, 1697, Eugene's scouts reported that the Ottoman army was indeed in the process of crossing the Tisa River. The vanguard and a large part of the cavalry had already made it to the western bank, but the main body of the infantry, including the elite janissaries and the vast auto baggage train, were still on the eastern baggage train. His army covered the distance to Zenta with astonishing speed, arriving late in the afternoon just as the sun began to dip towards the horizon. The surprise was complete. The Ottomans, preoccupied with the crossing, had not set up adequate defenses on the western bank and were caught entirely off guard. The battle began with a devastating artillery bombardment from the Habsburg side. Eugene's cannons, strategically positioned, rained down fire on the Ottoman positions, especially targeting the crowded pontoon bridge, which became a death trap. Ottoman soldiers, trying desperately to cross, were blown apart or fell into the river and drowned. Then Eugene launched his main assault. His infantry, arranged in a crescent formation, attacked the Ottoman bridgehead on the western bank, pushing them back towards the river. Simultaneously, the Habsburg cavalry, including the formidable imperial cuirassiers, charged the Ottoman forces. The fighting was incredibly fierce and chaotic, particularly near the bridge. Ottoman soldiers, trapped and with nowhere to go, fought with desperate courage. But the Habsburg assault was relentless. The discipline and training of Eugene's troops, combined with the element of surprise, the bridge, overloaded and under constant fire, eventually collapsed in places, sending thousands more soldiers plummeting into the water. Those who remained on the eastern bank were unable to come to the aid of their comrades. The battle was a massacre. It lasted only a few hours, but by nightfall the Ottoman army was utterly annihilated. Estimates of Ottoman casualties range from 20,000 to 30,000 killed or drowned, including many high-ranking officials. And the Grand Vizier's personal seal, a symbol of authority, which was captured. Thousands more were taken prisoner. The entire Ottoman baggage train, including the Sultan's personal treasury, fell into Habsburg hands. The Habsburg losses, in stark contrast, were incredibly light, perhaps only a few hundred. Sultan Mustafa II, witnessing the horrific defeat from the other side of the river, was forced to flee, leaving his army to its fate. The victory at Zenta was a triumph of military genius and aggressive execution. Prince Eugene's daring decision to attack a larger but vulnerable enemy army paid off handsomely. The Battle of Zenta was a watershed moment in the Great Turkish War. It effectively ended Ottoman military power in Hungary. The crushing defeat forced the Ottomans to the negotiating table. In 1699, the Treaty of Karlowitz was signed, a landmark peace agreement that fundamentally reshaped the map of Central Europe. Under the terms of the treaty, the Ottoman Empire ceded vast territories to the Habsburgs. Hungary, Transylvania, and Slavonia were all brought under Habsburg rule. The Principality of Transylvania, which had long been a semi-independent Ottoman vassal state, was now fully integrated into the Habsburg monarchy. This acquisition of vast and fertile lands, rich in resources, dramatically increased the Habsburg size, wealth, and influence. For the Habsburg dynasty, Zenta was the culmination of decades of effort to push back the Ottoman threat. It solidified their control over Hungary and confirmed their position as the leading power in Central Europe. Prince Eugene of Savoy became a celebrated hero, his military reputation cemented. The victory not only expanded Habsburg territory, but also their prestige, demonstrating their military prowess and their ability to effectively lead a new era of European power. The Habsburg eagle now truly soared over a vastly expanded domain. Number 2. Battle of Belgrade, 1717. 2 decades after the monumental victory at Zenta, the Habsburgs found themselves once again in a major conflict with the Ottoman Empire. This new war, sparked by Ottoman aggression against Venice, quickly drew in the Habsburgs, who were keen to capitalize on their previous successes and expand their influence further into the Balkans. Prince Eugene of Savoy, now a seasoned and legendary commander, was once again at the helm of the imperial army. His strategic vision and tactical brilliance were the Habsburgs' greatest assets. The prize was Belgrade, a strategically vital city located at the confluence of the Sava and Danube rivers. Belgrade was considered the key to Hungary and a crucial gateway to the Balkans. It had changed hands many times over the centuries, a testament to its strategic importance. The Ottoman Empire had held it since 1521, and its recapture was a major Habsburg objective. In the summer of 1717, Prince Eugene laid siege to Belgrade. His army, around 70,000 strong, began the arduous work of digging trenches, setting up artillery batteries, and blockading the city. The Ottoman garrison within Belgrade was strong and well supplied, determined to hold out. The siege was tough, with fierce resistance from the defenders and constant counterattacks. The August heat was oppressive, and disease began to spread among the besieging forces, just as it had in many earlier sieges. As the siege dragged on, a massive Ottoman relief army, estimated to be between 150,000 and 200,000 men under the command of Grand Vizier Hassi Halil Pasha, arrived. This was a force far larger than Eugene's own army, and it immediately began to dig its own vast network of trenches and fortifications around the Habsburg besiegers, effectively turning the siege into a counter-siege. Eugene's army was now trapped between the walls of Belgrade and the encircling Ottoman relief force. The situation was incredibly dangerous. The Ottoman relief army's intention was to starve out Eugene's forces or overwhelm them with sheer numbers. They brought hundreds of cannons, and for weeks the imperial army was under bombardment from both the city and the relief army. Sickness and desertion began to take a toll. Morale started to dip, and some of Eugene's generals urged him to abandon the siege and retreat before his army was annihilated. But Eugene, ever the bold strategist, refused to be trapped. He saw that the Ottoman relief army, despite its immense size, was spread out over a vast area, and its own fortifications were not yet complete. He recognized that the greatest risk was inaction. On August 16, 1717, under the cover of a thick morning fog, Eugene made a daring decision that would shock both his own army and the Ottomans. He would launch a surprise attack against the numerically superior Ottoman relief army. He left a small force to maintain the blockade of Belgrade and protect the sick and wounded, then personally led the main body of his army, perhaps 40,000 men, out of their trenches and into the fog. The advance was silent, coordinated, and utterly unexpected. The Ottomans, confident in their numerical superiority and their defensive positions, were caught completely off guard. As the Habsburg troops crashed into the Ottoman lines, the fog began to lift, revealing the chaos that had erupted. The Ottoman camp was a scene of utter confusion. Soldiers were still waking up, preparing breakfast or going about their morning duties, when the imperial cavalry and infantry burst upon them. The fighting was intense and disorganized. Eugene's forces, spurred on by their desperate situation and the presence of their legendary commander, fought with incredible ferocity. The Ottoman lines, though numerous, lacked cohesion in the face of the surprise attack. Their artillery was not yet ready to fire, and their commanders struggled to organize a coherent defense. The Janissaries fought bravely, but they were overwhelmed. The cavalry, usually so effective, found themselves hemmed in by the confusion and the narrow confines of their own camp. The battle lasted only a few hours. By noon, the Ottoman relief army was in full panicked flight. They abandoned everything: their tents, their cannons, their vast supplies, their treasure, and their sick and wounded. Thousands were killed, perhaps 15,000 to 20,000, and many more drowned trying to escape across the rivers. The Habsburgs suffered around 3,700 casualties. The terrified Ottoman garrison inside Belgrade, witnessing the destruction of their relief force, quickly surrendered. The city, after more than 190 years of Ottoman rule, was finally back in Christian hands. The Battle of Belgrade was a monumental triumph for the Habsburgs and Prince Eugene. It showcased Eugene's genius and boldness, solidifying his reputation as one of Europe's greatest generals. More importantly, it had immense strategic consequences. The capture of Belgrade opened the door to further Habsburg expansion into the Balkans. The following year, in 1718, the Treaty of Passarowitz was signed. Under its terms, the Habsburgs gained significant new territories, including Banat, northern Serbia with Belgrade, and parts of Bosnia and Wallachia. This vastly expanded their domains in southeastern Europe, pushing their borders further east than ever before. The Battle of Belgrade not only removed a significant Ottoman threat, but also confirmed the Habsburgs' role as the leading power in Central and Southeastern Europe. It provided them with strategic depth and new resources, cementing their prestige and influence on the European stage. The Habsburg Empire, now stretching from the Low Countries to the heart of the Balkans, was at the zenith of its territorial power, a legacy forged in battle and secured by the unwavering will of its leaders and soldiers. Number 1. Battle of Kalin, 1757. The mid-18th century was dominated by the titanic struggle between the Habsburg monarchy and the rising power of Prussia, led by the brilliant but aggressive Frederick the Great. This rivalry, known as the Silesian Wars, reached its peak in the 7 Years' War, a global conflict that drew in most of Europe's major powers. At the heart of it was Maria Theresa, the Habsburg Empress, determined to reclaim Silesia, a rich province seized by Frederick. In an earlier war, by 1757, things looked bleak for Maria Theresa. Frederick, a master of swift maneuvers and daring battles, had repeatedly outmaneuvered and defeated her generals. He had invaded Bohemia and was threatening Prague itself. The Habsburg capital, Vienna, was in a state of high alarm. Frederick's victories at Rossbach and Leuthen that same year would cement his reputation as a military genius. But before those famous defeats, Maria Theresa's army faced a desperate test. The imperial army, primarily Austrian and Hungarian troops, was under the command of Field Marshal Leopold Joseph von Daun. Daun was a cautious, methodical general, a stark contrast to Frederick's aggressive style. He was a master of defensive tactics and careful planning. His army numbered around 54,000 men. Frederick the Great, with about 34,000 Prussians, was besieging Prague. He knew that Daun's army was approaching to relieve the city, and he decided to leave a portion of his forces to continue the siege while he marched to intercept Daun. On June 18, 1757, the two armies met near Kalin, a town in Bohemia. Frederick, true to his style, intended to launch a surprise attack on Daun's flank. He was confident of victory, perhaps overly so, given his string of successes against the Austrians. Daun, however, had chosen his ground carefully. His army was deployed on a series of hills and ridges, their flanks protected by ravines and woods. He had anticipated Frederick's aggressive approach and prepared a strong defensive line. Frederick's plan was to march his army around Daun's right flank, then wheel around and roll up the Austrian line. The maneuver was complex, and it quickly went wrong. Prussian columns got separated, and their attack was not as coordinated as Frederick intended. As the Prussian infantry advanced, they were met by disciplined volleys of musket fire from the well-entrenched Austrian lines. The fighting was savage. The Prussians, renowned for their discipline and rapid fire, attacked with their usual ferocity. But Daun's men held firm. The Austrian infantry, often underestimated, stood their ground and delivered devastating volleys. The terrain, with its broken ground and hidden ravines, worked against the Prussians, disrupting their formations and making coordinated assaults difficult. A critical moment came when some Prussian battalions, eager for glory, advanced too far, too quickly exposing their flanks. Daun saw the opportunity and unleashed his cavalry. The Austrian cuirassiers and dragoons, often seen as inferior to their Prussian counterparts, charged with surprising effectiveness, smashing into the exposed Prussian infantry and throwing them into confusion. The Austrian cavalry, particularly the Saxon and Hungarian hussars, also played a crucial role in harassing the Prussian flanks and rear. Frederick, observing the unfolding disaster, rode personally to rally his troops, exposing himself to extreme danger. He famously pleaded with his fleeing soldiers, "You dogs, would you live forever?" But even his presence and command could not stem the tide. The Prussian attack was faltering, taking heavy casualties. As the day wore on, Daun launched a general counterattack. His fresh reserves held back until the opportune moment poured into the fray. The exhausted Prussian lines finally broke. The retreat turned into a rout. Frederick, for the first time in his career, had suffered a major defeat. The Battle of Kulm was a stunning victory for the Habsburgs. The Prussian army, once thought invincible, suffered around 14,000 casualties, including over 8,000 killed, wounded, or captured. They also lost 45 flags and 49 cannons. Habsburg losses were significant, around 9,000, but a victory nevertheless. The immediate consequences were profound. Frederick was forced to abandon the siege of Prague and retreat from Bohemia. The strategic initiative swung for a crucial period back to the Habsburgs. The victory boosted the morale of the entire Habsburg monarchy and its allies. It showed that Frederick the Great, despite his genius, could be beaten. For Maria Theresa, Kolin was a personal triumph. It vindicated her faith in her generals and her army. It demonstrated her dynasty's resilience and resolve in the face of overwhelming odds. The victory allowed her to retain control over Bohemia and prevented a catastrophic loss that could have crippled her empire. It gave her the breathing room needed to continue the war. Kolin didn't win the entire war for Maria Theresa, and the conflict would drag on for several more years with many more battles. But it was a critical turning point, a moment when the Habsburgs, against a truly formidable foe, proved they were not only survivors but could also deliver crushing defeats. It solidified their status as a major European power, capable of standing up to and even defeating the continent's most feared military genius. The victory at Kolin cemented Maria Theresa's personal authority and the enduring strength of the Habsburg Empire, proving that even after centuries of struggle, their power remained unyielding, forged in the fires of battle.